The next session is on the new Electricity Act, envisaging separation of carriage and content and retail competition. It will cover framework for segregation of carriage and content, transformation of Discom to DSOs, operating rules and regulations. And to run this session, we have in the chair Mr. R.K. Pujari, former chairperson CERC. Sir, I invite you to the stage. Let's welcome him. So please come. I would request you to, Rita, to get the placards changed. Member and Acting Chairman Uttarakhand. All right. Mr. Akhilesh Kumar, Member DERC. Please welcome him. Then Mr. Murli Shankar Gopalkrishnan, Vice President, Solutions and Product Engineering, Fluid Grid. Thank you. Please come. Mr. Rajiv Chaudhary, Head Regulatory Affairs, BRPL. Welcome. And Shweta Ravi Kumar from the FSR Global. Welcome, Shweta. And we have Mr. Bhaskar Sarkar, CEO, TP Northern Odisha Distribution Limited, former chairperson CERC, to set the stage and the context for this session going forward.
Good afternoon, and I welcome all my panelists to this interesting topic on the amendment to the Electricity Act and the future structure of the Discom that it envisages. The separation of carriage and content has been under discussion quite some time. In fact, as far as I remember, it has been under discussion for last 10 years. And the last amendment to the Electricity Act bill that was introduced to the Parliament in 2014 had very specific provisions for separation of carriage and content. And the bill was referred to the Standing Committee of the Parliament. The Standing Committee of the Parliament did make several recommendations which was discussed by or evaluated by the Ministry and the Government of India. And the bill was suitably amended, keeping in view the recommendations of the Standing Committee and the feedback that came. But unfortunately, the bill was never reintroduced to the Parliament and it lapsed. Now, the present bill, amendment bill that has been now introduced in the Parliament, does not contain specifically any provision for the separation of carriage and content. It does talk about delicensing, but delicensing is different from what carriage and content really envisage and the way it has been done. So again, this amendment has been referred to the Standing Committee. It is before the Standing Committee now. We don't know what will be the recommendations or the suggestions of the Standing Committee, what will be the view of the government on those recommendations, and how ultimately the Parliament is going to pass, if at all, the amendment in what form and shape. So, as in today, two issues. One is, as far as my understanding goes, there is no specific provision of separation of carriage and content in the proposed amendment. And secondly, whatever has been proposed, we don't know in what shape and form it will finally be passed, or if passed at all. So, best thing is to now, at the moment, the way I look at it, without linking to the amendment proposed, we look at the concept of carriage and content independently, see how relevant it is, what is the thought process, why it has been discussed, what is the advantage that we look at when this particular concept or amendment as and when it comes in, or the carriage and content separation takes place? And what are the difficulties in implementing it? What are the challenges that one foresees in the transition period? And ultimately, you're going to ask questions, is it likely to at all happen? I mean, in the sense, and that question also needs to be asked. So, since we have expert panelists from different fields, academics and the practical and field, so we like, as a person, as a chairperson, I like to have those views and responses regarding what exactly we mean by separation of carriage and content in the Indian context. If the carriage and content, both the businesses are separated, and the supply business, we presume that there will be multiple players, including private players, and consumer will have a choice. Is there anything that is preventing, in the present structure of the Act, for the private player to play that role? And if you're going to do that, what is the additional value or additional value addition that you're going to see? I mean, that question needs to be asked. And what are, as I mentioned, look at all the legacy issues and the issues that is being faced by the Discom as on now. In the transition period, when the transition takes place, the separation of carriage and content takes place, what are the challenges that we faced? I think that the issues that we need to discuss. As I mentioned earlier, maybe we do not look at so much at how the Act is going to be passed, whether this provision is going to be there or not. But irrespective of that, I think there is need to discuss this, because this has been under discussion and this has been strongly proposed by the government, saying that it's one of the solutions to the various issues that Discoms faces in terms of so-called inefficiencies and financial issues that they face. So I think I now hand over to the moderator, Mr. Tongia, to take over. Thank you.
Thank you, Shri Pujari, and thank you to my distinguished panelists. In the interest of time, I will not do a formal introduction, but everyone knows who everyone is and the information is there. But I'll really take off or pick up from what Pujari ji said, which is, let's not focus on the details of what is or isn't legislated. Let's not focus on when, timelines and all of this, but really step back as distribution and sector focus. What does it mean? What do we want and why? And so with that lens, I would like to break up our conversation, and hopefully it's an interactive conversation. I don't believe anyone has a PowerPoint, if I'm correct, which is good. So we can have more interactive. And the issue of regulation is really primary, because regulation drives incentives. And incentives are what drives your design, your operations, and hopefully viability and profitability. So if we step back, we've had deregulation, quote unquote, which was unbundling. The big change for India was unbundling, creation of independent regulators. Most states have unbundled, a few have not. They're still integrated, but as companies now instead of government departments. But if we look towards what is proposed, which is a form of structural separation, which then enables the ultimate goal, which is competition. That is one goal or one outcome of this process. So what does competition really get you at the distribution level? So we have to talk about, as you said, the efficiency theoretical. Now, if we step back and look at Discoms, a good chunk, something in the order of 70+% of the cost of a Discom is power procurement. So then ask the question, what do these changes mean for your planning process, pricing process, if the costs are heavily there? We've studied this at my institute in detail, and our website has the papers. It's all free online. On looking at these proposed changes and coming up with 2 or 3 learnings from other countries and questions for India. If we want, for example, delicensing, which is another flavor in addition to carriage and content separation. Carriage and content separation means separating wires and retail. You can also just say that there will be a wires entity, it may be the incumbent, but there will be retail competition without even licensing required, or maybe you can license them. These are different choices. But how do we see retail competition if we don't, or retail liquidity, if we don't have wholesale liquidity? Because power procurement is the other issue. And then the question becomes, and this is something I'm sure Shweta may touch upon, look at Europe. How do you get wholesale liquidity if you don't have fuel markets that are liquid, competitive, and available? Let's ignore for a second Russia-Ukraine crisis as a temporary blip. So, as we talk about transition, one of those buzzwords, like it or not, things are changing. And these changes include decarbonization, digitalization, partly decentralization. But what these also do is they create new sets of stakeholders. We've heard the term prosumer. Consumer turning into a producer is just one of it. But there will be new players. Anand talked about, something as a service. Eventually you will get storage as a service, because I don't think every household will need to put up its own storage facility. So in the first opening remarks, which I would request everyone to go through, briefly just share big picture, what does it mean, what are pros and cons, or changes from today we need to plan for. Then in the second round of questions and discussions, we could get into more details. And I'll give some suggested questions for that. And then in the third round, we come back to what do we do? What are the action steps? What are we going to request from the regulator? What are we going to request technology companies to fix or figure out a solution to? With these opening remarks, it's my pleasure to now request Shri Akhilesh Ambas, who's member regulator DERC, to share brief opening remarks. Sir.
Thank you, and setting the topic open for this discussion. As desired by the chairman, that we should restrict our views with respect to this carriage and content. The liberalization took place in 1990, and thereafter, seeing the success of this telecommunication, probably we also thought of having this carriage and content in the field of this electricity sector also. But the major problem here in these two, telecommunication and electricity, is both are the electromagnetic waves. One is wireless and another is with wire. So what happened in 2014 bill, that it was mandated that every retail should have his own wire. And that was the problem due to which that could not proceed probably with the bill. And it went for amendments. Now this new amendment has come, which is quite different. And here we can see that the amendments which we have been proposed still requires certain further considerations, or you can say further inputs. We can see that the present amendments, or you can say requires in the field of its implementation with respect to balancing between state and the center being in the concurrent list, and the policy of our 2003 Electricity Act, which says that it should be away from the government. So these things we have to take care. Then probably this will take care. And what you have said that others we can discuss next round. So we can discuss other issues, how to implement it in later.
Thank you. We'll switch the order around. Since we've just had Delhi's regulator, then why don't we turn to Delhi's Discom and take the remarks from you. Rajiv.
Yeah. See, I feel that today or tomorrow this is going to happen. There is bound to have competition in the retail, and probably I don't know whether it is for good or whether it is for bad, but this is bound to happen. Because why? The carriage ultimately today has been neglected. The main job of the distribution network is to concentrate on the capex and look into the network to have a strong network. Today we are, the ideal situation says that we should have N-1 network, so we can serve the consumers 24 hours supply. But hardly that involves huge capex, and because of the financial crisis most of the distribution companies are going through, there is no such N-1 network available to us. Secondly, when we look at the consumer's point of view, the consumer says that, look, I have been getting this power from BSES or from Tata's or from NDMC in Delhi. And so it's a kind of a monopoly, but actually it's not a monopoly. If we look at the tariff, they say that, look, I have been charged more, but they hardly know that 85% of my tariff is power purchase cost, and that has been controlled somewhere else. So we as a distribution company, we only collect on behalf of the generating company and the transmission company and send it back to them. The money goes back to them. So this is a good concept, a carriage and content. It is going to happen today or tomorrow. We should be prepared for it, but it is not without the challenges. If we look at the challenges, yes, what happens to the PPAs, the legacy PPAs which we have today? Most of the distribution companies are bound by the PPAs. So what happens to that? What happens to the regulatory asset which is being parked to be recovered from the future consumers? What happens to that? What happens to the pending litigations which are there before the APTEL? And if I talk about Delhi, we have litigations pending since 2013 before APTEL, and almost 2004 before Supreme Court, which is going on. So what happens to that? What happens to the payment security mechanism? Today, Center has issued a payment security mechanism that the distribution companies should follow. So obviously, when there is a carriage and content, there has to be a payment security mechanism. Otherwise, the entire value chain will fall. So what happens to that? So here the regulator plays a major role. The regulator, both center and the state, has to play a major role. Now what about the tariff? The tariff, whether the regulator will issue a ceiling tariff, and if they issue a ceiling tariff, then obviously the play is on the power purchase cost. So if a person gets a cheaper power, sources a cheaper power, he can offer a cheaper tariff to the consumers. If he can't offer it. So what happens to that tariff? Another issue is that what happens to the metering? Or we are looking at longer litigations which will go on between the suppliers and between the distribution companies. What happens to that? So these are quite challenges which I foresee that we'll be able to, we have to resolve before this comes in?
Thank you, Rajiv. 2 points I just want to touch on. I mean, one, you talked about these legacy issues. I think they're real, they're big, but they're solvable with effort. They're not fundamental roadblocks to this process. Second, you talked about this CapEx versus service. I think that's a very key point, because when we were in a cost-plus world, as long as the regulator says, okay, then it goes into your tariff. But the whole point of this is to break into a service model, where it's not just about being a bill collector. And I think that is full of promise, but it also has other implications that we have to talk to, especially on social welfare redistribution. Less of an issue for Delhi, but bigger outside Delhi. So with that lens, maybe I'll switch gears and request Bhaskar, if you could share some thoughts on, well, anything you'd like, of course, as opening remarks, but also this whole issue that, look, what will change for a customer? Let's assume we do this, but yet, as we've heard, a lot of it is either regulated or upstream uplink. So what's going to change? Is it that I can go say that, hey, do you have some 10,000 kilowatt hours or 10 kilowatt hours that you can give me at what price? A, it's complexity for a consumer. And B, what do we think it's going to come, or how much scope is there? So,
thank you, Rahul. I would just, to answer to your question, I would just refer to one of the actual parallel licensing which has happened in Mumbai, which is somewhat similar to that. Although there are differences. But there, what has happened is that between Tata Power and Reliance, or between Tata Power and BST, there was it's a parallel license where both the companies work in the same area, something like the distribution DSO concept. Now, what has happened there is that the differences between this and that was that there was no segregation of PPAs. There was no segregation of the network. The network was, whosoever was having the network, they were free to lay their network. There was no cross-subsidy sharing like it has been proposed here between the Discoms. The cross-subsidy was entirely to be borne by the customers. And the pure play was on cost and value-added services. And let me tell you, to answer to your last point, of the entire benefit has been reaped by the consumers. Because to keep the cost low, there has been a number of initiatives taken by the companies to be more competitive, whether it is by reducing the power procurement cost or the wheeling cost or whatever. And that has actually given the entire benefit to the consumers. So ultimately, come what may, the consumers are going to gain. That is the, that is one thing which is given. However, just like to touch upon some of the points which need to be considered in this particular bill which has come. The one is what Rahul, he also talked about, that regarding the PPA allocation. Now, the basic expectation of the consumers is the reduction in the cost. That is also the major play to become competitive, because cost is the major 70% of the entire tariff. Now, if the PPAs which are there from legacy, they have their own efficiencies or inefficiencies built in. If they are transferred or shared across the new incumbents, that may be thought of that how can that lead the new entrants to be more competitive as far as the cost is concerned, because they will have to bear the burden of carrying forward these PPAs which may not have been the best PPAs or best competitive PPAs in the world. The second is that they also the consumers who need to have a choice based on the price, that also may get compromised because of this sharing of the PPAs that may be hindering that. The other point is, just to add to a few of the points which Rahul said on this, the legacy point. 2 points are, one is that the losses, the way this is calculated in the losses, the way it is approved by the regulators, there is a difference. So whenever the new entrants will come, they will get the number of units at a much lower level, because the losses actually experienced are much more than what has been allowed. So how will that gap be met by the new incumbents, new entrants who will be, taking over? And so the less units also will be a major challenge. Area recovery is one issue where there are huge arrears which are piled up in every Discom from the consumer side, and also huge number of payable amount which is pending to be paid to the power procurers. That also needs to be figured out, that how will that be also liquidated or managed. So these are some of the things which I thought have to be thought about. The other point with the experience of Mumbai Tata Power, what we had seen is that when this sort of thing happens, the first benefit is always taken by the cross-subsidizing consumers, who are the higher tariff-paying consumers. They tend to move out. They tend to take the benefit of lower tariff. So, although the provision has been given for the cross-subsidy pooling and all, but ultimately what happens is the incumbent licensees are left over with the cross-subsidized consumers who are who will then become a burden. So the cross-subsidy pooling has to be very efficiently looked upon, so as to how this can be balanced and how the incumbent as well as the new entrants will get a level playing field. So these are some of the thoughts which I thought need to be thought through. Although this is a welcome move, definitely this will create a lot of efficiency, forced efficiencies into the system. This will also improve the agility of service delivery, as well as bring in much more prudence in the expenditure of capex and opex. But these points need to be also thought through. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess in some ways the country will benefit from Mumbai's battle scars, because it wasn't as positive initially. There were a lot of things the regulator had to get involved with for some of the reasons that you had said. If I could now turn to Shweta for opening remarks, please.
Thank you, Rahul. Thank you, Mr. Pujari, for setting the tone. I think this is one of those sessions where there is more questions than answers, clearly, and that's something even the world experts would not be so confident in giving us solutions. So I'm just going to run a couple of pointers that both of them raised and share some of the global observations of the same. So firstly, I think separation of content or carriage as retail markets, as we call it in Europe and US, in theory is of course very good, but in practice it has been applied very cautiously in most parts of the world. So I think it has been done in phase-wise, open to commercial and industrial customers, and then slowly to residentials.
Sorry, was it by size ever? Was size a criteria for going, or was it commercial industrial only?
Commercial industrial, I think. First large consumers, then
so the
CNI.
Size was also
yes, a size also as a factor, yes. And then, of course, to the residential consumers, and also in many pockets, I think, rolling back of residential consumers, because it was not seen as a lucrative business case. Of course, there are a lot of positive waves as we observe, as Rahul also rightly did identify. There is, of course, the structural reforms that's happening in terms of unbundling in most markets. Hello? Yeah. Also with decarbonizations and more renewables coming in, we have different services and products that could be offered to consumers. And also with new business models like aggregators, energy communities, the options are countless. But of course, all of it comes with its own challenges. The second aspect I would like to point out is if we do plan to separate content and carriage and expose consumers to retail, something that we have to be okay with is also revealing the true cost of supplying electricity, which in a heavily regulated market becomes a challenge because it's more of a political economy topic rather than a price issue. So that is something that we need to be, first ask ourselves, are we even ready to face that shock? Because I read news articles when Adani needed to take over the Mumbai zone, they sent big fat checks to the consumers, and Twitter was all abuzz with, we didn't know we had to pay so much. So that is something we'll have to have a talk with the governments before we plan to roll out. Then, of course, if we do introduce new products and market, I mean, the whole point of coming up with the retail market is, as Rahul did point out, is to introduce competition. And with competition means you're able to give different products and different pricing differential. So if you're not able to bring in that kind of price differential, there is no point of offering or opening up retail. So if you were to introduce new concepts like, say, dynamic tariffs or time of use tariff, as it's called here, what we need to also see is how willing are the retailers as well as the consumers in terms of their risk appetite. Are they willing to, or are the retailers just going to pass through costs, as some of the participants already have highlighted the fact that efficient procurement is the game of retail. So if they're not able to efficiently procure, then who is going to bear the cost? If it's the consumer, then as you can see the news flashing in Europe right now, everybody is throwing up their towels in and saying they don't want to pay such high prices because it's exorbitant. So in the context of India, where the cross-subsidy is the few trying to cross-subsidize the many, how does the dynamic change is something that we'll really have to figure out. There's no other part of the world that has an answer to this. And then, of course, as even Mr. Bhaskar did rightly bring out, if the incumbent is going to become the default supply provider, even after opening up retail, then is there even a necessary exercise to be done? Rather, wouldn't there be another efficient way of supplying to the consumers by already not separating? Because in many of the markets where they did open retail, they did see that incumbents, 80% of the consumers were willing to be with the incumbent companies. So therefore, the switching costs were too low and it was not lucrative enough for people to step in. Either it could be because of lack of consumer awareness or that there was no added benefit of people switching because of regulated tariffs coming in. So these are some of the pointers I'd just like to leave out and then take it up at the next round. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think UK was a pioneer that rolled back. It's one of the examples. Sorry, England and Wales. It's not all UK. It's technically England and Wales. Question just to the audience, so sort of that flag. How many of you would be willing to pay more for your bijli in return for some of the things that Shweta and Bhaskar talked about, which were new products, new offerings, better quality, TOD, or these sorts of a thing? How many of you would be willing to take on a higher tariff? Very few hands went up. How many of you would be willing? Now here's where it comes back to the crux of what competition would do. It's not about higher or lower, because if you knew it's higher, then that's a different story. It's about risk and volatility. This entire process and what the regulatory system is meant to do is balance who's bearing the risk. And so now, how many of you are willing to say, I'll take expected lower costs, but higher risk that it may not always or end up being lower? More hands went up, but uncertain. But the takeaways from both surveys as well as behavioral experts is this will evolve. As you said, there are things that we have to Indianize, that we have to go through. And so this is one of the challenges of this evolution of regulation. Murli, you're with the service provider, technology provider, and one of the questions is not just about your technology or your space, but even for smart meters and all of this. How would that change in how we should think about it? How a Discom would need to buy? Is it going to be an easier world, more predictable or appropriate in a fully regulated cost-plus world? Or how would competition change how we need to think about batteries or smart meters? Any thoughts towards that?
Right. So I think one point that I would like to add before addressing your point, Rahul.
Could you bring it closer?
Oh, yeah, sure. That's this segregation of DSO and DNO is probably not something new in our country. We have been attempting to do with the distribution franchisee model that we attempted. So when the regulators think about establishing this model, so we should be able to reflect upon on what were the pros and cons, or what were the success that happened with that model, and what could have been improved with that. And in my opinion, yes, the first few years of operations of the distribution franchisee, a lot of commercial losses got down. But then the private players did not have a sustainable margin to be able to sustain themselves to a large extent. And so that again is because of probably a rigid pricing model. And they did not have the space to enable dynamic pricing. And why they did not have is probably the lack of ability to measure the real-time consumption. And that's where I believe the smart meters is going to play a large role in doing a real-time measurement, enabling a capturing of the peak load, and be able to price dynamically.
I mean, no debate on that. I'll come back with a follow-up, but is that
yeah.
sure now?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Using that as an entry point to our second, so now instead of going one by one, I'd request everyone to jump in with suggestions or insights. One of the things that isn't talked about enough as part of this transition is what happens to planning. Western Australia already has 1 out of 3 homes with rooftop solar. Now in India, it may not be as quick or as immediate, but our sunlight potential is certainly there. And for the niche cream users, the higher payers, the economics of solar is actually already there. So the question becomes, what does that do, for example, to planning, to procurement? If procurement is your big chunk of costs, but you don't know how much will evolve, you sign a PPA, if the PPA is the route to go, and you find that there's a shift towards rooftop solar, then someone's looking at stranded assets at that point. That's just one example. Smart metering. If I've got multiple entities, is there a separate metering service provider? Or is it an incumbent? Because who owns that data? Where does it sit? What type of data is required? Because if I want to offer a new product, like time of day, what you had said, or even something more exotic, an EV bundled charging, or many things are possible, then I would need different sets of data than someone who is worried about the poorest of the poor would want us focusing. So this is just an example of more of the nitty-gritty of this transition. Thoughts, suggestions, reactions?
I'll just add one more question to that. I mean, what happens to the universal service obligations? I mean, there's the poorest of the poor. I mean, who provides them? Is the government agency will come in and say they all get lumped together to one particular supplier, or last resort, or remains? I need the.
Oh, absolutely, and we should not underestimate either the size of this need in some areas or the political importance of such consumers.
You have touched upon a very important point of need for planning. However, if you look at the distribution business fraternity in India, we have actually not felt the urgent need of planning, of cost control, of cost benefit analysis, and everything driven towards a lower cost. Maybe one of the reasons can be that we are based on a cost plus regime, and that has given us the protection and the and also the luxury of going a little bit off bit, because we know that there can be some pass through and we'll get the benefit. So that definitely is something which has to be a total paradigm shift in the way things are dealt with. And the planning in the current context of huge amount of standard power as well as the transient powers coming in terms of the network requirement, etc., has to be done. But the point is that when a distribution DSO is coming, he's not mandatorily required to set up the network. So he can ride on an existing network. A person who has done all the planning will have to bear the brunt. So you never know that DSOs will have a very lighter play, so that that can give a benefit to the DSOs, but the incumbents maybe have to bear the entire brunt of doing the entire planning, managing the PPAs, managing the huge network assets which have already been built with whatever of any efficiency or inefficiency we can talk about, and like the sir said, that USO. So ultimately it may happen that the cream will go to the new DSOs, and the subsidized consumers will remain as a part of the incumbents, because they have we have seen from Mumbai experience also, they have the least stickiness, a maximum stickiness to move. They have the least interest to move because they're very happy with whatever they have, and because their tariffs are subsidized. So that may be something which maybe really there has to be a paradigm shift in the attitude and the way we look at things going forward.
So we're adding yet again to more questions, because answering the USO cannot be done independent of tariff design and cross-subsidy and subsidy. Yeah.
Maybe just a quick reaction. I think a very important point raised in by Mr. Bhaskar here, that the incumbent has to do the hard work of planning. So I think one of the models that we have been discussing at the school is also the integrated distribution company model, because they know the region, they know their geography much better. It probably is nice to have one nodal agency aggregating all these different services that the last mile should provide. And then you have each of the services competed for and being offered in a particular geography, which would probably improve the efficiency. It's another dimension to this whole discussion. Yeah.
Which then prompts the need for data sharing, data standardization, data practices, etc. Yeah.
Yeah, if I take
Can you bring it closer? Yeah.
Yeah, if I take the UK model, there is a data sharing which is happening. Like the new operator takes the data from the old operator, and the data is available centrally. So obviously a person can easily shift. Supposing if there is two suppliers, supplier 1 and supplier 2, the data, if it's available, the data is not a thing which is only limited to supplier 1. It is commonly available through an independent metering agency. When I say that independent metering agency within the double quotes, so the data can easily be transferred and can be collated centrally, because obviously the suppliers ultimately will have to pay to the power purchase for its input, whatever the input has been consumed by the customer. The other issue is you touched upon in Australia, this solar, yes.
In Western Australia.
Yeah, Western Australia. And in fact, what I understand is there, because of the generation, huge generation, the distribution companies pay for consuming something because there is a negative in the grid. So that's one issue. And secondly, on the Mumbai thing, what Bhaskar took up is that we have seen in our example is that because of the cross-subsidy element, the cream consumers who is getting at a higher tariff, they tend to shift early. But when there is a cross-subsidy surcharge is being kept in a pool, they'll come back to the original suppliers. So that's one issue. And in Mumbai also the issue is on the meter. If I am duplicating the assets, ultimately it burdens the consumers today or tomorrow. So we, whenever we go for this thing that DSO, carriage and content, there is a need for an independent metering agency where there needs to be a sharing of the data. Otherwise, ultimately there will be a duplicacy of the assets, and ultimately it's the consumers who would be bearing the brunt.
So there's an old phrase, if you can't solve a problem, make it bigger. And I think that applies that we shouldn't look at all these problems we're seeing in isolation. They're linked. So getting a coupled solution, something that synergizes. So smart and green will have to go hand in hand. So your point about pricing, I think, is very apt. In the short run, we're not there yet. But eventually, look at India's ambitious targets post-Glasgow or otherwise, climate change. The amount of RE that is coming will be enough to go into surplus mode, equals curtailment mode. So you're literally throwing away electricity. That's what creates the negative prices. So now how do you signal that? How do you incentivize that in either a regulated cost plus or in a competitive space? So time of day, I think, is going to be one of the key regulatory hooks that is needed, wholesale and retail. to really do this change going forward?
Basically, again, all these issues that has been flagged, when we were discussing about 2014 amendment, we broke them into two parts. One is the legacy issues, which we know very clearly. There was clear-cut solution available. So we suggested certain solutions. And there are transitional issues. When you implement the thing, there will be a lot of transitional issues. And there are future operational issues, like who will own the meter, the power will come up to the meter, and meter will be with the supply DSO or the network provider. So all the issues were there. So that one can decide which is the best practices, and depending on the past experiences in the world, you can take it and frame it so that upfront everybody knows that this is how the structure will be. Also, the past legacy issues, like for example, PPA issues was flagged. We say, okay, there will be, for a transition period, there will be an independent body to whom all the PPA will be transferred. Every PPA will be transferred to a particular body. You will take out the average price. Until these PPAs run their natural life cycle, this average price will be available to all the supply. So all this structuring is possible to do it. And there are certain transitional issues which you need to break your head and find out a solution. But best thing is that you clear-cut indicate, this is how I will deal with the past issues, this is how I am going to deal with the transitional issues, and this is how the future issues, rightly, wrongly, best, second best, we don't know. But at least very clearly specify that this is how it's going to happen. Then a lot of clarity do come in. But that is coming to the basically segregating and operating it. Unfortunately, the issue that we are discussing is because large number of Discoms, because their own governance issue, are not able to have the financial issues and they are inefficient. So you segregate, put the network with them, supplier, you put the supply business separately and expect a lot of private players to come in and take up the supply business so that the supply business where the losses takes place will taken care of. I mean, that is to what extent that particular thinking is correct, because if that is so easy to hand over the supply business to large private players, large number of private players. Today also Discoms can be handed over to a private players, and privatization was you are not restricted, or legally it is possible. So it is basically more of the right political thinking, political will, and going in the correct direction. So based on limited thinking that no, just to bring in or take care or address the issues of current position of large number of Discoms, we will do the segregation of carriage and content. That probably I think is too limited base on which to work on. We should look at a much larger framework and long-term framework and see how it's going to, basically impact in the long term. And this is not going to happen together. As he rightly says, both the AMI or the smart meter, we talked about the last session, smart meters, those are possible only if concurrently you go for the time of date tariff. That unless all those other part, the tariff part comes in, their changes do come in. Both the regulators do, it is get accepted by the consumer, and government, the political economy accepts that. Everything will not happen because you are doing in a piecemeal system. Unfortunately, in power sector, everything is so interlinked. Both commercial and technical are so interlinked. You cannot distinguish, commercial issues and technical issues separately. They have to go on hand in hand. It doesn't happen in most of the cases. So you do push one thing, and then suddenly it doesn't give the full result. Then you say it failed. No, it didn't fail because I didn't do the other part. Every time we look at any solutions, I think we should look at much broader way and clear cut as an academic or on such discussions. We should bring out saying that these are the 3-4 things. Other things also you need to do to make it successful. You can't do it independently. This one, I can't just implement a meter and then forget about everything. Nothing else happens. That's going to happen. You have to do other things. Otherwise, as you say, cost-benefit analysis will not work out. So here also, I think we need to look at much broader issues and then see how we're going to have in the long term. Not purely from just because Discoms are today not in a position to perform in a particular way, we will do it. That limited approach, it doesn't happen.
Absolutely. And I think we heard this last session also, that if you just say I'm converting meter, US said AMR, like labor saving is your objective function. But our objective and need is a much bigger canvas that we have to do it in an integrated manner. Now, integrated is both harder, but it also becomes easier to get viability because there's more synergy if we design it well. So using that as a stepping stone to our third last round of discussion on action items, steps, or wish list, we've got different stakeholders. So you are welcome to pose a question from operator to regulator or regulator to technology provider that A, what do we need that we don't have today? And second, what are some incremental steps we can take without yet waiting for legislation to change, whether it's on planning, technology design, or other things. So for example, one of the recommendations a number of us have written about is, even before you do competition and carriage content separation, all the Discoms need to start segregating their accounts. So you know what is a wires cost and what is a service or a retail cost. That Maharashtra has been a pioneer. Some states have started doing, but not all states are doing it yet. I think that's just one of the steps we should do, even if we don't have carriage and content separation. But any other sort of suggestions, thoughts?
So we were discussing on how to share the data, right? So in this ecosystem where the DSO would have the privilege to buy the power from the open market or probably have a power purchase agreement directly with the GenCos, probably. So in this whole energy delivery ecosystem, what happens is there are multiple stakeholders involved, right? From the STUs to CTUs, and the more important part of it is to ensure transparency of the data, right from the consumer's data to the losses of each of the stakeholders, the STUs and the CTUs losses, and the transmission company's losses, and the GenCos, SG and the AGs has to be managed in a very transparent way to ensure the respective stakeholders on the energy delivery channel, like all that, should be aware of it, and that's one important aspect that should be taken care of in this ecosystem.
So you've asked for something that no one would disagree with, but practically, today we don't have DT meters. Forget smart meters in some places. So are we then stuck until we solve the infrastructure problem? Because otherwise, right now, there's a lot of reverse engineering that can happen in coming up with the, you know, the accounts.
No, I don't think it stops. There are mechanisms where probably until that point has to be manual entries into the system, which has to be trusted by the rest of the stakeholders, and eventually move to a mature model where there is an automated trust that's happening.
See, you talked about a very important point of DT metering. Even feeder metering is also not available in many places. So while that should not be a showstopper, but I think even then we need to prepare ourselves to create the stage for taking on this. And I think metering is one of the things. Whether we will be able to go for the entire smart metering journey or not, I don't think that should be a showstopper, but at least the metering to understand the TND losses accurately has to be there. Otherwise, it will be a very generic and conceptual play which will be questioned, and there will be always fights and heartburns later on, as we have seen in Mumbai. So that, I think, whatever form it is, it need not be always smart meter, but we have to have metering, at least in the feeder metering, and DT metering to a large extent if it is possible, yes, but at least at the feeder metering, it has to be completed. Many of the Discoms do not have that.
So another suggestion, I mean, building on we heard from the last session, what do you do with the data? So whenever a Discom says, if only I had more data, I could do better, the flip question we have to ask them is, are you harnessing the data that's already there? So I think that's a point for industry and analysts and stakeholders to improve upon. Since we started a bit late, I would like to make sure we get time for any questions from the audience. Please keep it as brief as you can, and if it's directed to anyone in particular, please let them know. And just mention who you are also, please.
Good evening, sir. I'm Arvind Pal from REC. So my question is to PK Pujari, sir. So you mentioned a very, you pointed out the very right question. What about the obligation of universal service? So the background that REC comes from, we have seen the rural electrification very closely. So I wonder, sir, why the cooperative model has not been very encouraged in the country, while our neighbors like Bangladesh and Nepal have tried it and have been very successful. Thank you, sir.
Cooperative. I can't tell you on the legacy, but if anyone has any thought, cooperative states, for example.
Yes. Nepal and Bhutan, why not in our country?
Yeah, but US is a good parallel for India to look at because it's federal in nature. It has a combination of investor-owned, governmental, and cooperative or municipal. And all three have been able to be successful. So it's a great question. I'll flip it the other way. Today we don't have. So how do you create one? Is the Discom going to say, okay, you turn cooperative? Which area will they give up to become cooperative? The one they don't want. In US, who is cooperative? Rural area, which is the least lucrative for Discom. So Discom would be happy to make unprofitable areas into cooperative, but who's stepping up to take over? I don't know.
No, since the forum is here, just my question is that why not? You asked what should be our incremental steps towards carriage and content. So why not this, sir? Please, like why not the rural part? Since now we have Kusum scheme, the part A, B, C, all three are there, sir. Why a model cannot be developed which can be in a cooperative manner, and this the village itself can be a prosumer?
Yeah, I don't think anyone has any objection. In principle, there is any objection to that. It's just that how do you going to implement? As he rightly says, Discoms will be happily hand over or saying that this is the area you do cooperative, which is the least profitable area. And maybe there is difficulty for those areas to form the cooperative. In fact, in large part of India, if forest produces are being handled by cooperatives, if say your finances are handled by the cooperatives, and vegetable and things are being handled by cooperative, why power can't be done? I mean, there's no logical answer to that. It's just that maybe finance and economics still is not working out. I leave it there. So, Sweta, you want to respond?
Maybe just to add to that, I think one of the reasons why we won't be looking at it as a cooperative is because if you look at the definition of SDG 7, energy access, it's not just about lighting some basic appliances. So we should stop thinking about rural, urban in that cliched way. Rather, we should be able to serve a consumer to be able to use as much power as they want, as and when for whatever they want. So in that case, we shouldn't create a scenario where we off people who are in the lower rank of consuming power today, because if you want the economy to improve, energy needs to be linked there. So,
no, in fact, it's the other way around. What we have seen that in the DDGY and RGY sense, when the villages were electrified, we see after a month or so, the power is cut. Even the wires are lost, were stolen. So it's not a sustainable model. The model has not been very successful in that way. So if the stakeholders are the villagers themselves, then probably there might be a different result.
Yeah, maybe I should ask Tata Power to reflect, because if you go for off-grid solutions, which is great in concept, no. How do you really make it economically viable?
Yeah, actually, we are also working on that to explore how the microgrids can be used as a entity in the far-flung areas where people actually, these things which you said happens, because if it's a far-flung area, normally the poles get stolen, even the wires get stolen. So in those cases, if we can form corporate, and this has been very well working in places where we have seen this happening in Bihar and UP also, where these microgrid cooperatives have been formed. They actually protect the microgrid installations and the network, and they also decide their own tariff, because microgrid is one thing which is outside the purview of the regulation. So the cooperatives decide what will be the type of tariff, and they decide how this will be shared and how this will be operated. It is actually a very successful model which is already happening. However, for the other places which are under regulations, which are the tariffs are determined by the regulations, and because there is a normal philosophy of cross-subsidized and cross-subsidizing consumers, and that develops the entire tariff for the Discoms, I think there is very little urge, as Rahul also said, that urge for the Discom to shell out an area and form a cooperative on its own, in its own initiative, because nobody will be taker also. And as Rajiv said, that the most worst place may be allocated that. So that's what, and also there are obviously the political issues as well, which I did not want to mention. But those are the things which are happening. But it is possible, and we have made it possible in the microgrid regime, where cooperatives are being formed and they are managing very efficiently.
So just to add on, since you deal with the northern part of Odisha, in the Mayurbhanj district itself, probably not less than 100 to 150 odd number of villages were given microgrid facility under DDGY, DDG scheme, sir. And intentionally they were made hybrid inverters, so that in the future there will be a time when it can be connected to the grid. So, sir, I wonder if some model or some cooperative model can be ventured into, like that will be...
Very well said. Actually, we are doing it in Mayurbhanj, and as you said, it is already being planned there. We are working on the microgrid model in Mayurbhanj, which is expected to be a successful story. So we are working on that.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions? So can you wait for a mic, please? Just can we get a mic?
My name is Jayant Nayak from SIDBI. This is to the regulator out here. I just wanted to check on that 80% is power purchase cost, and this 20%, how much it will be competitive in the sense if we look at carriage and content. So there is hardly any play if you look at that way.
That is what the statement was made, in the sense that large part of your cost of power is the power purchase cost. So your flexibility allowed to the supply DSO is limited. And superimposed on that, if you have a fixed tariff or you don't have a flexible tariff, then what kind of product differentiation or tariff differentiation you can provide? So the competition, of course, depends on that. I mean, the competition comes when somebody comes, different type of products or different type of tariff differential is there. That flexibility in the today's structure is not there. That's the point. But then, that is, as I said, it is a legacy issue. Today is 80% of the cost of power purchase, because when you transfer it, we say that in next 5, 10 years, maybe those whole PPAs will run out. So new contracts will come in. By the time you have medium-term contracts, short-term contract, you have day-ahead, term-ahead market, all those flexible products are available in the market. Maybe that time, the average power purchase cost in the tariff probably will come down below 80%. Good. I mean, this likely to happen. So that's why I say it's a futuristic. Don't look at it today, what is happening, and take a decision. You look at in the future, and this is going to happen. So
how many years?
No, say today, most of the PPAs had been entered into, say, you take NTPC, is around 11, 12, 11, 12 they were entered into. So by about 35, 36, I think most of them will run out. And freshly, many people are not entering into PPA, and people are much aware of it, saying that if earlier, a lot of Discoms entered into PPA looking at the peak load. Today, though, they are not entering into it. They are looking at the load analysis and saying that this is my base load, probably I'll enter into PPA, rest all I'll go into short term. All these new options are available, market products are available. So what used to happen, say, 7, 8 years back or 10 years back, today those options, much more options are available, and they've become much more aware. So and they're using their expertise and modeling to find out what is the basically the power tenure mix that will have in their whole portfolio. I think gradually the Discoms also are learning, and they have become much more.
There's a question on this side. Well, first, sorry. Okay.
Should I? Okay.
Briefly, yeah.
My name is Arup Ghosh. I've been in the power sector for about 45 years now. I continue to be associated with Tata Power. To me, the two biggest benefit of separation of carriage and content is one, very, very little chance of the regulatory asset building up. And in many, many states, we find that regulatory asset has built up to such a level that I do not know how many generations would be required to liquidate that. So very little chance of that happening once the carriage and content is separated. And the second biggest advantage is for the consumer. There is a sense that, yes, I am not subject to a monopoly, that there is competition available, there is choice available to me. However, there's one big concern, and I do not know how that will be addressed, so was requesting comments from the panel here. There is a huge section of our society who are at the poverty level or below poverty level or around the poverty level. They do require support. They do require support from, in some form or the other, food, etc., that's being taken care of. They do require probably subsidized electricity, or they require electricity, maybe a limited quantity. So how would that be designed in an environment where carriage and content has been separated? To me, that's a concern. Would request some comments from the panel on that.
Thank you. Already mentioned that that would be handled through a pooling mechanism. I mean, that has been thought through already.
Yeah, like the lifeline or the poorest of the poor sections, they has to be handled through a pooling of the cross subsidy also. Because in telecom also there is a fund which is created and managed by the government for other purpose. So here also we can have a fund, and then that from there the cross subsidy, as was mentioned, that cross subsidy can be used. It can be recovered from the part of the tariff. So this design can be done both for the old PPS cost and then for the cross subsidy. This design can be done. That's why I say that you can think through it upfront, decide it so that everybody is aware of it. See, the problem starts, we haphazardly jump into something and then suddenly decide later on. If you can run through the problems and issues and challenges and specify that this is how we're going to handle it in our own ability or understanding, whatever we say, and prescribe that this is how it's going to happen, there's a clarity. Everybody knows that this is how it's going to happen. So cross subsidy I can handle, no problem on that. Legacy issue I can handle. Even the your regulatory asset can be handled. If 5,000 crores of regulatory assets are there, I hive it off of the Discoms balance sheet or this thing, keep it separately. Maybe I give a trajectory, load it on each tariff because the tariff will get pulled initially. So this all can be handled. Yeah. It may have pain, it may have difficulties, but there is a solution to all these issues. But we should be willing to take those solutions. These are hard solutions, very, very hard solutions, not very easy solutions. So if you don't want to address it, the problem starts. Certain things, what do? We want to do something, but we know that this is a problem, but we don't want to address it. You put it on the carpet and then go ahead. Then the problems stares at you. After 2 years, then you have a problem. So upfront, we should identify each issues and problem, address it, and I think we forgot to mention that this is in a federal structure, in a concurrent subject, we need to discuss it openly with all the stakeholders. It's not that only Government of India will push through an act and then get it done. No. A lot of debate is there. Yes, Parliament is there, Standing Committee is there, you can discuss with all the state governments. There may be a lot of views, counter views. We need to at least take everybody along. And I can say here that however difficult, however much differences of opinion between the Government of India or the particular state governments are, when the discussion takes place on critical issues and important issues, solutions are there. I mean, nobody is unreasonable. What we hear in the public is a different thing. But when issues are discussed in government level between the state government and Government of India, tone is different. I mean, so we should...
And there are genuine needs.
And it is discussed and it has happened in many cases. Even I give the example of Uday. Uday may have failed, it might not have succeeded. But that was a one which was accepted by every state government. Every state government has, irrespective of political parties, agreed and signed the document. I mean, they signed the document means they had trust, saying that this is going to do some good. I mean, that is a great achievement. It may not have succeeded to the extent that we wanted. It's a different issue. But point is that everybody could be taken along and everybody had faith saying that yes, something good is happening. I mean, that's a great achievement. That's how the federal structure works. So we need to discuss that openly, and then everything is doable. And issues have to be identified, and the solution has to be suggested and accepted upfront. Then everything becomes clear.
Sir, I
have we had a hand here. I mean, the organizers are pressuring us time.
Yes, my name is Manas Kumar Das, Chief Corporate Affairs, TPNODL. I have a small question, sir. Regarding this carriage content as per the Act to be implemented shortly or after passing this cabinet or whatever may be, my question is whether this is the right time for implementation of this thing and whether infrastructurally we are capable and commercially we are actually so advanced to handle this carriage and content, number one. My apprehension is that intrastate ABT, which was introduced in 2003, not yet been implemented till today in most of the states because of so many reasons best known to you all. And I should not say anything. And in Odisha also, we have tried a lot to implement, but there were a lot of issues. Again, we stopped. And now again, they are going to start it. Whether infrastructurally in present scenario, are we ready to implement such things? This is my question, sir. Can it be?
So, I mean, question comes back to almost like the Uday example, that are you shooting for perfection or are you searching for things getting better in the right direction?
Yes, I mean to say, sir, before implementing something in the paper itself, there should be a standard procedure to be followed by all the Discoms to infrastructurally in a correct position to implement this.
So what?
See, just to add to your point, yes, there were issues in the implementation of ABT, but see the benefit side. What has happened? The paradigm change which the ABT, whatever way it might have happened, might be it is, 85%, 90% successful, may not be 100%, but see the benefit and the power of that, initiation. So we have to start somewhere, whether it is no time is the right time, no time is the wrong time. We have to start somewhere.
Sir, for that, my request is a standard of procedure should be followed by all to come to a stage. My question is that.
That's why I say that if anything, what did I mention? I mentioned that this is an issue which affects the Discoms and the state government. There should be open debate. We should realize and understand each issues and challenges that are likely to come up. Into our best of ability, we should be able to find out what are the issues. We're not God that we know every issue that we're going to come up, but at least to a large extent to our ability, we know what are the issues that are going to come back. We recognize that issue, take them on the books, give a solution, and then go ahead and do it. That's what I say. So that not problem starts, as I told you, that we don't discuss or we don't look at the issues and jump into it. No, nobody is going to suggest that. And second, for your information, as I mentioned earlier, this proposal is not there in the proposed amendment of Act also. So it's not going to come in this amendment anyway. So unless it gets changed drastically in the Parliament, it is very unlikely.
But again, these are things what are called the Overton window in policy science. The more you discuss something that appears far-fetched, at some point it is no longer far-fetched. And so I think that is the steps we are taking. Smart grids has been the same journey. 10 years ago when we set up a lot of this space, people like, what is smart grid? Then it became, why do I need smart grid? Then it became, okay, how do I do the smart grid? So we're shifting the conversation along, and that is why I think I'll now close unless you have some more closing thoughts, Pujariji or anyone.
I think we have been summarizing basically. Thank you so much for all the interesting issues, debates and questions that has come. And as you all agreed, there are issues and challenges when you implement it, and there is n number of issues are there. Some of the issues we can address, some of the issues we can visualize and then give a solution. But issue is that everybody has to be all the stakeholders have to be consulted and they have to take along. My personal view is that this is an important, as and when it happens, it will be an important, very, very important reform, and it cannot be done in either, push through. It has to be duly consulted, and all the stakeholders need to be taken out. There's a large number of challenges are there, not easy. Nobody is saying that it's got an easy task, and those challenges need to be recognized, and solutions need to be provided to the best possible way upfront, so that the implementation becomes smooth. But hopefully, if not this amendment, at some point of time, I think as was mentioned, that is going to be inevitable. Some changes is going to come at some point of time. So maybe not this amendment, maybe next amendment, or maybe in future sometime we'll see the separation of carriage and content.
And as we should prepare ourselves, even without this legislative change is upon us. Technology is changing. Storage is going to get cheaper. So someone will, instead of going to a third party, they may go to self-generation, which itself is a similar impact technologically. And so therefore, we need to plan for change, anticipate some of the change, and then try some other solutions. That's the only way forward. Thank you very much for your active engagement. Sorry we couldn't get to all the questions, which just shows the importance of what is such a dry and abstract subject is actually very key to the Discoms. Thank you to the organizers. Thank you to my distinguished panelists.
Thank you, Shri P.K. Pujari ji in the chair, Rahul as a moderator, and all the distinguished panelists. And thanks to each one of you for being part of it. The crux is, change is imminent, success is optional. So let's discuss, deliberate, and prepare. And it is not only the solution will come from here, and I'm sure when we all work together, we will see the solutions may be coming from this pocket, or this pocket, or this pocket. So thank you for being a wonderful audience as well.